Daniel Wyatt didn't expect trouble when he moved to Briar Glen. In fact, trouble was what he thought he'd finally left behind. After a turbulent few years losing his wife to cancer, downsizing his career, pulling his daughter from a crowded school system, this small suburban neighborhood promised exactly what he was looking for: peace, safety, and a fresh start for his 12-year-old daughter, Sophie. The house was modest but cozy. Perched on the end of a clean, winding cul-de-sac, birds chirped in the mornings. The neighbors waved, and Sophie, wide-eyed and full of the cautious hope kids carry after tragedy, smiled more in their first week there than Daniel had seen in months. She made friends with other kids almost instantly. She rode her scooter with two girls from across the street and a boy who lived near the corner. They drew chalk dragons on the sidewalk, organized impromptu water balloon fights, and chased each other under the sprinklers. For a few precious days, Daniel believed they had done it escaped. Then, on a Wednesday evening just after dinner, Sophie came in pale and trembling. She yelled at me, she whispered, breath quick. She said I'm not allowed to ride on the sidewalk and that I should be on a leash. A leash, Daddy? Daniel crouched to meet her eyes, his heart tightening. Who said that? The lady with the sunglasses. The one with the little clipboard. She stood right in front of me and wouldn't move. Said I was a hazard. And she wrote something down. Daniel sighed. Maybe she's just particular. She said she knows my name, Daddy. That night, while Sophie watched cartoons in the living room, Daniel stood at the window and watched the neighborhood. It wasn't hard to figure out who she meant. Across the street, in a pristine white porch chair, sat a woman in her mid-50s with tightly pulled hair, wrap-around sunglasses, and the posture of someone who hadn't relaxed in years. On her lap sat a thick folder. She was writing something, slowly and methodically, pausing now and then to scan the street like a hawk surveying prey. He saw her glance up at his window, saw her smirk. The next morning, Daniel walked Sophie to the corner where the kids met up. He wanted to see what would happen, and sure enough, the woman Karen, as he'd later confirm, appeared from nowhere and marched straight toward them. No scooters on the sidewalks, she said without a hello. HOA rule. Page 6, Section 2. Daniel turned slowly. She's 12, and she's not breaking anything. Karen offered a tight, forced smile. You must be new. I help enforce the bylaws here. Keeps the neighborhood from falling apart. Sophie shrank behind him. Daniel felt a flicker of heat in his chest. We moved here because we thought this was a nice place for families. I'm not interested in policing children. Karen didn't respond. She simply turned, made a note on her clipboard, and walked away like she'd won something. Later that day, Daniel found a printed notice folded and tucked under the welcome mat. It was labeled HOA, Warning Child Conduct Infraction. He read it 3 times, trying to decide if it was a joke. It wasn't. That night, he made the mistake of telling himself it would blow over. That Karen was just a bored woman playing pretend cop. He didn't know yet what she was capable of. He didn't know she carried a weapon, or that she'd already decided his daughter was a threat. Daniel had never believed in neighborhood drama. The idea of lawn wars and HOA turf battles had always seemed like something out of a sitcom, mildly ridiculous, mostly harmless. But after only a week in Briar Glen, he found himself researching local ordinances, flipping through HOA bylaw PDFs, and rereading the warning notice. Karen left like it was a legal summons. The language was formal, cold. It stated that unsupervised, juvenile activity in common pedestrian spaces poses liability risks and that Mr. Wyatt's child was observed engaging in unsanctioned scooter riding, whatever that meant. It closed with a polite threat. Continued violations may result in cumulative fines or disciplinary review by the board. Sophie was too young to understand the politics. She just wanted to ride her scooter and play chalk games with her friends. Daniel didn't want to strip that innocence away, but something about Karen's behavior bothered him more than he let on. It wasn't just the rule obsession, it was the way she looked at Sophie. Not annoyed, not exasperated, but cold, calculated. He tried to resolve it peacefully. That Saturday, he walked across the street and knocked on Karen's door. She answered without opening the screen. Yes. Hi, I'm Daniel Wyatt, Sophie's dad. He offered a smile. I just wanted to clear the air. I understand you're involved with the HOA, and I respect that, but the sidewalk thing, maybe we can find a middle ground. She didn't return the smile. There are no middle grounds when it comes to safety and property maintenance. She's 12, he said carefully. And riding a scooter isn't reckless behavior is the gateway to liability. Karen cut in. And your daughter isn't the only one. Children aren't exempt from consequences just because they smile. Daniel felt a pulse in his jaw. You're threatening consequences. Karen's voice remained flat. I'm enforcing community standards. The conversation ended with the screen door shut in his face. By Monday, Daniel received another notice, this one mentioning inappropriate confrontation with a board liaison. It came with a printed picture of him standing on Karen's porch. Then came the stares. Some neighbors waved like nothing had changed, but others, especially older ones, began eyeing him differently. Mail arrived later. The garbage bins weren't emptied. Petty things, small, quiet punishments that didn't leave fingerprints. Worse, Sophie stopped going outside. She tried, once, brought her scooter to the sidewalk, helmet in place, heart full of stubborn hope. Karen emerged from her porch within seconds, arms crossed. She didn't say a word that time. She just stood there, still as a statue, watching. Sophie went back inside and stayed there. That night, Daniel sat on the porch with a drink he didn't want, staring across the street at Karen's dark windows. Somewhere in that house, she probably had her clipboard, and a camera, and God knew what else. He thought about calling the HOA board directly. But every contact form led to the same generic email. The phone numbers looped into endless voicemails. It wasn't an organization, it was a wall. Karen wasn't a cranky neighbor. She was something else. Something embedded in the system. And Daniel realized the mistake he'd made. He thought he was living in a neighborhood. He wasn't. He was living in a territory Karen believed she controlled. Saturday afternoon arrived with sun and laughter. The neighborhood was unusually alive, kids drawing chalk masterpieces on the sidewalk. Music drifting from someone's portable speaker, folding tables set up with lemonade and snacks. The whole event had come together spontaneously. A show of unity among the younger families, who had grown tired of the HOA's constant breathing down their necks. Sophie had been hesitant at first, but Daniel coaxed her outside with soft encouragement and a pink sidewalk chalk set he'd bought that morning. She joined the other kids, slowly at first, but within minutes, her giggles returned. She sketched stars and a crooked cat on the pavement, while Daniel watched from a folding chair nearby. It was the first time in weeks he'd seen her look like a child again. Then he saw Karen. She stepped out from her porch, like a predator, into open field, clipboard in hand. Sunglasses on, her mouth drawn tight in a line of disgust. She didn't speak at first. She just walked slowly down the sidewalk, eyeing the colors and the children as though they were evidence at a crime scene. Parents shifted uneasily. Conversations hushed. Daniel stood up. Karen finally stopped in front of Sophie, who was kneeling beside a large, swirling chalk dragon. This is defacement of community property, she announced. Her voice carried like an announcement over a school intercom. You've been warned about this before. Sophie blinked up at her, confused. It's chalk, it washes off. Karen's lip curled. This is my last warning. You don't belong here if you can't respect the rules. That was when Sophie stood up, not to run, but to defend herself. Her voice trembled but held firm. You're not the police. You can't keep telling people what to do. You don't own the sidewalk. Karen reached into her cardigan pocket. Daniel stepped forward, alarm bells blaring in his brain, but he wasn't close enough. Not yet. With a sudden movement, Karen pulled a small, black stun gun from her pocket, thumb already on the trigger. Don't you raise your voice at me, she snapped, and in one horrifying instant, she lunged forward and pressed the device to Sophie's side. A harsh crack of electricity. A scream. Daniel heard Sophie's cry before his eyes registered what had happened. She collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut, clutching her side and sobbing uncontrollably. Parents rushed forward, shouting. One woman screamed for someone to call 911. Daniel sprinted, shoving past a stunned circle of onlookers, dropping to his knees beside his daughter. She assaulted my child, he shouted. She used a weapon on a 12-year-old. Karen didn't flinch. She looked around, still holding the taser, completely unshaken. She became physically aggressive. I feared for my safety. I acted in self-defense. There were phones recording now, but Karen looked right into one of the cameras and calmly recited her defense again. As though rehearsed, I acted in self-defense against a hostile individual on public property. The paramedics came first, then the sheriff's deputy. Daniel expected outrage, expected handcuffs, questioning, anything that felt like justice. But the deputy A middle-aged man with tired eyes and a stiff uniform didn't even ask for Karen's weapon. He spoke to her like an old friend. She smiled and nodded, pointing at Daniel like he was the problem. Sophie was taken to the hospital for observation. The deputy gave Daniel a printed incident report receipt. No charges, no arrest, just paperwork. And Karen, once again, returned to her porch, taser holstered, clipboard balanced on her knee, calm as ever. Daniel waited beside Sophie's hospital bed as machines beeped softly and nurses passed by in the hallway. Indifferent to the storm that had torn through his life. Sophie had stopped crying, but her eyes glassy red, and tired told him something in her head cracked. The doctors said she would be fine. No permanent damage. Minor electrical burns, they said. She's lucky. He didn't feel lucky. He felt furious. The moment he stepped outside the hospital, he called the sheriff's office. An automated menu routed him through 5 different extensions before dumping him into a voicemail box. He left a message, then another, then 3 more, back to back. The one person who finally called him back was Deputy Carlson, the same man who'd let Karen walk away from the scene. Mr. Wyatt, Carlson said with an air of casual dismissal. There's no case to pursue. Ms. Whitmore stated she acted in self-defense. Witness accounts are inconclusive. Given that she's a registered HOA liaison, she has limited authority in neighborhood enforcement. Should aced a 12-year-old girl. It's a civilian-grade stun device, Carlson replied coolly. Not lethal. It doesn't fall under the same classification. Besides, she has the right to defend herself if she feels threatened. Daniel stared at the wall. She felt threatened by a child with sidewalk chalk. Look, Carlson sighed. I know it's emotional, but if you pursue false charges, that'll reflect on your record, not hers. The call ended, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something darker than anger, hopelessness, but it didn't last long. By the time Sophie was released from the hospital, Daniel had already torn through the HOA handbook, reading every vague, loosely enforced rule Karen had ever quoted like scripture. He combed online forums, downloaded local legal records, and discovered a breadcrumb trail of similar stories, families who had moved out in frustration. Tenants fined into silence. Even a woman who'd sued Karen and quietly settled out of court. The HOA board, Daniel realized, wasn't just incompetent, it was compromised. 3 of the 5 board members had ties to Karen. One was her brother-in-law, another ran a business she reviewed positively on neighborhood forums. The system was hers, and it was built to protect her. Sophie stayed indoors most days now. She flinched at loud noises, especially buzzing sounds. She refused to walk past Karen's side of the street. The spark she'd brought into the neighborhood was gone. That's when B knocked on his door. He didn't know her. Not really. An older woman with wiry gray hair and reading glasses. She lived 2 doors down. She introduced herself simply. B, retired paralegal. I heard what happened to your daughter. Daniel hesitated. Did you see it? I saw enough. I've seen enough. For years now. B stepped inside without waiting for permission. She got my neighbor's kid expelled for intimidating her dog. She's had 4 families evicted through zoning technicalities. People don't talk because she makes it miserable if you do. Daniel leaned forward. Why haven't you said anything before? I didn't have proof, B said. Now I do. You've got video, witnesses, a police report, even if they won't act on it. She went too far. Something began to shift inside Daniel. A decision. She hides behind rules, he said slowly. Then it's time I make the rules work against her. Daniel had never thought of himself as the strategic type. He paid his taxes, taught high school biology, kept his head down, and avoided confrontation. But now, every hour, he wasn't taking care of Sophie. He was reading, studying, planning. B met him daily at his kitchen table, where files, printed screenshots, and notepads were beginning to stack like war maps. What started as a loose collection of Karen horror stories was becoming a case file. Dates, times, witnesses, patterns. She's been escalating for years, B muttered, scanning an incident report she pulled from a neighbor's public complaint. But everyone backs off once the fines hit. Or the threats start. Daniel looked up. She's used the taser before, hasn't she? B nodded grimly. Once. 3 years ago, teen boy. Claimed he rushed her gate. Parents moved away within the month. HOA sealed the incident as a private disciplinary matter. Daniel tightened his grip around his coffee mug. This ends now. They began contacting former residents, people who had sold quickly, mysteriously, or under pressure. One man, a contractor, had been fined repeatedly for parking his work truck in his own driveway. He sent Daniel photos of Karen measuring the vehicle with a tape measure in the middle of the night. Another couple described her entering their backyard without notice, claiming she was documenting overgrowth. Each time someone fought back, they were bombarded with violations, denied use of community facilities, and eventually offered settlements. If they just agreed to leave. The tipping point came from a woman named Carla. She'd left 2 years ago after Karen accused her of operating a daycare without HOA approval for babysitting her niece and nephew. "I lost custody for 6 months," she said over the phone, her voice bitter. Karen filed a complaint with Child Protective Services. Said I ran an illegal childcare operation. No one even questioned her. Daniel sat in stunned silence. Sophie sat quietly in the next room, trying to draw again. But her dragons looked more like clouds, now soft, unfinished, like she didn't believe in them anymore. That night, he reviewed his footage again. The incident, Karen pulling the taser. Her cold declaration of self-defense, the expressions of the neighbors, frozen behind her. The camera didn't lie. She wasn't afraid, she was in control. She had planned for it. He began organizing all the clips and documents into folders, one for the HOA board, one for law enforcement, and one for social media. Because if the system wouldn't help him, the court of public opinion might. That's when the first retaliation arrived. He stepped outside to retrieve a package and found his trash cans knocked over, their contents strewn deliberately across the driveway. On his windshield sat a new violation, unsanitary property conditions, immediate fine pending. The HOA seal at the top, Karen's signature at the bottom. Later that night, his front motion sensor tripped. Daniel checked the security feed. Karen, standing near his porch with a flashlight, recording something, a phone held high like a badge. She stood in his flower bed for nearly 10 minutes, muttering to herself, pointing at the hedges, occasionally glancing toward his window. Daniel watched. In silence, B called him the next morning. "She's getting nervous. That's why she's pushing. You're making her feel the pressure." He didn't respond immediately. His eyes were still on the footage. On Karen's face, it didn't show fear, it showed calculation. Daniel leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "Let's raise the pressure." Then, and that was the moment he decided. He wasn't going to expose her. He was going to trap her. Daniel didn't sleep much after that. Every spare minute went into preparation, camera angles, sound testing, lighting. He repositioned the gnome cam closer to the walkway and upgraded the tree-mounted microphone to pick up distant murmurs. A wide-lens security camera now covered the entire front yard. Even the birdhouse wasn't a birdhouse anymore. He wasn't just building a case. He was building a trap. The plan started with an invitation. He printed bright flyers on neon cardstock and hand-delivered them door-to-door with Sophie at his side, both of them wearing matching smiles. Wyatt Family Block Bashes Saturday at noon. It read. No permits mentioned. No HOA approval. Just a promise of music, games, and a bounce house he never actually ordered. B raised a brow when she saw the flyer. "You know she's going to come running the second she sees this." "That's the idea," Daniel said. "This time, I'll be ready." Karen did not disappoint. On Friday evening, she posted a neighborhood bulletin titled Unauthorized Event Notice to the community board and emailed it to every resident. In it, she warned that certain individuals were endangering the integrity of the neighborhood with disruptive and unlawful behavior. It was all legalese fluff, but one sentence stood out. Any violations observed will be documented and reported immediately, including unsafe child gatherings and graffiti activity. Graffiti, he smiled. She couldn't help herself. Saturday arrived hot and cloudless. By noon, a dozen families had shown up anyway, tired of Karen's tyranny, and more than willing to pretend they weren't nervous. Folding chairs circled the lawn. Someone brought hot dogs. One of the teens set up a Bluetooth speaker. And in the middle of it all, like a phoenix reborn, Sophie drew dragons again. Daniel watched from the edge of the lawn, cold drink in hand, every camera humming quietly. Then Karen appeared. Not walking, striding, hair pulled back, clip-on badge glinting on her blouse. In one hand, the infamous clipboard. In the other, a sleek, black stun gun holstered at her hip like a sheriff from a lawless town. "You are in direct violation of HOA Code 14B. She shouted as she reached the lawn, voice slicing through laughter and music like a blade. "This is unauthorized, disruptive, Dangerous to community peace. Parents froze. Kids stopped drawing. Daniel stepped forward calmly. Karen, you're trespassing. This is my yard. This isn't just your yard. This is common use frontage. It extends 3 feet from the curb, and I checked the plat map. You're wrong. Everything beyond the sidewalk is mine. She faltered for a second, only a second, but it was long enough. She turned to the nearest child, Sophie, who was chalking a phoenix across the concrete. You again. I told you. Defacement. She's drawing, Daniel said quietly. With chalk. Karen's hand went to the taser. She didn't raise it, tie it, but she unholstered it and held it by her side, thumb resting casually near the switch. That's when the first drone buzzed overhead. Karen looked up, so did the neighbors. Then came the phones. One by one, adults began raising their devices, recording, broadcasting. Smile for the live stream, Daniel said. Karen turned, eyes wild now. This is harassment. This is intimidation. She pointed the taser at Daniel. Back away, or I swear, he didn't move. Because he didn't have to. From across the yard, B called out calmly. It's all on tape. Every word, every threat, even the part where you planted trash on his property last Tuesday night. Karen blinked. Then something broke behind her eyes. She turned back to Sophie, screaming, "Get off the sidewalk!" and stepped forward, taser raised. Daniel's fingers twitched. He was ready. Karen's foot struck the edge of the sidewalk like a war drum. Her voice no longer shrill, but unhinged, dripped across the front lawn. Step away from my property. Sophie froze. The chalk piece slipped from her hand and bounced harmlessly against the pavement. Her eyes went wide, not with fear, but with the same stunned disbelief Daniel felt the day it all began. Only this time, he wasn't watching from a distance. He moved fast. Quicker than Karen expected, he placed himself between them, his back shielding his daughter, his hands raised not in surrender, but in readiness. Karen stopped just short of him, taser arm extended. I said move, she hissed. You're holding a weapon. You're threatening a child. Again, Daniel said evenly. And this time, the whole neighborhood's watching. Karen's face twitched, caught between rage and a sudden awareness that things were slipping. She looked around, eyes darting. 3 neighbors were live streaming. 2 more headphones pointed directly at her. The drone above zoomed in silently, its little lens locked to her every twitch. I'm defending my community, she snapped. I have every right to. You have no right. Daniel cut her off. Not here. Not anymore. He saw the exact moment she snapped. Her hand lunged forward. The taser crackled, but Daniel was ready. He sidestepped and caught her wrist mid-swing. The device jolted harmlessly into the air as he twisted her arm outward, not to injure but to stop her. Karen shrieked and shoved at him, but she had no leverage. The taser dropped to the grass. She lunged for it, and Daniel kicked it away. The neighborhood erupted. People moved forward. Someone shouted, she attacked him. Another voice echoed, that's the same taser she used on Sophie. Karen scrambled to her feet and tried to snatch the device from the ground, but Daniel was there first. He picked it up, calmly, slowly, and looked her in the eye. I don't need this to stop you, he said. But Karen's wetting, panting, her clipboard long forgotten, snarled and reached for it again. That's when he made the decision. Just a flick of the switch, a crackle, and he gave her exactly one brief, controlled jolt. The taser buzzed against her hip, just enough to drop her to her knees. She let out a strangled yelp, eyes wide in shock. Her body tensed, then crumpled backward onto the chalk-dusted sidewalk. The crowd went silent for a long second. Then came applause. It started slow, uncertain. Then it grew. Not cheering violence but justice, relief, release. And Daniel just stood over her, arms loose at his sides, the taser dangling from one hand. As sirens wailed in the distance, they weren't from the same sheriff's office as before. These weren't the deputies with family ties and HOA excuses. These were state police had sent the live stream to a friend in the attorney general's office mid every thinkeran's threats. The taser, Daniel's restraint. Her final attack was already in motion before the first cruiser even pulled in. Karen tried to sit up, babbling about bylaws and citizens' rights, but the officer didn't care. You assaulted a child, he said, and you just assaulted an adult. With a weapon. I'm on the HOA board, she shouted. The officer looked up. Not anymore, you're not? Karen was cuffed and led away in stunned silence, past a crowd of neighbors she had once controlled. now watching her like the threat she had always been. Sophie stepped out from behind Daniel and looked down at the chalk drawing still half finished beside Karen's fallen clipboard. Without a word, she picked up her chalk again and kept drawing. Briar Glen had never been quieter. The week after Karen's arrest unfolded like the slow unraveling of a long-tied knot. The HOA board held an emergency session behind closed doors, but it was too late for damage control. The footage from Daniel's yard, the taser, the assault, the crowd's reaction had already gone viral. News vans circled the edge of the neighborhood like vultures, feeding on sound bites from former victims. One headline called Karen the tyrant of the suburbs. Another dubbed Daniel the dad who fought back. Inside his home, Daniel wanted none of it. He turned down interview requests, politely ignored podcast offers. What mattered was that Sophie was safe. She still didn't like loud noises. She didn't rush outside the way she used to. But she was healing. Slowly, steadily. One day at a time. The case moved fast. Faster than anyone expected. With the evidence ironclad and public interest swelling, the state filed charges within a week: assault of a minor, brandishing a weapon with intent to harm, and criminal harassment. She was denied bail on grounds of community threat. The fallout reached further than Karen. The HOA board collapsed under scrutiny. One member admitted to falsifying votes in 3 elections. Another was exposed for funneling repair contracts to his brother's company. Every bylaw violation Karen had issued in the last 2 years was suspended, pending review. The HOA's legal budget tripled, overnight mostly for defense. B was appointed as temporary president by a unanimous vote. She tried to get Daniel to take the vice chair seat. He declined. "I'm not interested in playing God with shrub height," he said with a tired smile. But he did offer one suggestion: a policy requiring HOA enforcers to undergo background checks, with zero tolerance for use of divorce devices. It passed unanimously. Sophie returned to the sidewalk on a bright Sunday afternoon. She wore a pink helmet, just a little too big, and carried a box of chalk under one arm. Daniel stood by the porch, watching as she joined 2 other kids and began sketching a phoenix, this one bigger than the last. A real estate agent passed by and smiled politely. "Is this where the taser lady lived?" she asked, glancing at Karen's now empty house. Daniel didn't answer. He just looked toward the window where Karen used to sit, clipboard on lap, ruling with silence and surveillance. The blinds were closed now. B walked over later with lemonade and paperwork. "We're renaming the park," she said, handing him a form. "Any thoughts?" He didn't even glance at it. "Call it Dragon Park." She blinked. After her chalk drawings. She was never scared of Karen, he said. She just didn't know how to fight back. Now she does. B smiled and nodded. Dragon Park it is. As the sun dipped low, Sophie finished her phoenix. This one had wings that stretched across the entire sidewalk, flame trailing from its beak, eyes fierce and defiant. She stood, admired her work, and then turned to her father. "I want to teach the other kids how to draw one too," she said. Daniel smiled. "Good, let the whole neighborhood burn bright." Later that night, long after the chalk drawings faded in the sprinkler mist, Daniel walked to the mailbox and found a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo, a blurry street cam capture of Karen, 2 years ago, holding the same taser and pointing it at another kid. On the back, someone had written, "She's done this before, but this time, she lost." Daniel folded it carefully and slid it into a file marked proof, then locked it away, just in case.